Yo, yo, yo. Hey, guys, welcome back to another awesome edition of the Best Practices Show podcast. My name is Kirk Behrendt, where we find the best experts in all of dentistry to give you some great information to help you create a better practice and a better life. And have you ever thought to yourself, should I add an associate? Maybe I should. Am I ready for an associate? Well, if you have those questions, I brought in the master today, Paul Sletten, who I have known for a very long time. And we help you answer the question, should I add an associate? It's an awesome edition. So hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back to the Best Practices Show podcast. I love that you're showing up here. And as you're going to see, I'm bringing some of the best minds in all of dentistry to help you make some decisions and create a better practice and a better life. Have you ever thought to yourself, I don't know, should I add an associate? Maybe I'm ready for an associate. What should I do? Well, a lot of you have those questions. And I brought in the master himself, Paul Sletten. Paul, thanks for being here, buddy.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So good to be with you. I was joking before we hit the go button. You know, selfishly, I love these because I get my own personal CE session with the master here. So like, you're just an incredible friend, colleague, great advocate, a voice of reason. So just so you guys know, and Paul, I want you to do a little bit of intro yourself, but I've been doing this for 25 years. There's a lot of stuff that happens as practices grow, transition, adding associates, unfortunately passing away. There's things that happen in dentistry, and Paul's my guy. So I call Paul, and Paul is just the voice of reason and helps me think through this, and he's going to help you guys today. But Paul, I want people to hear from you. Who is Paul Sletten? Give us a little bio.
I grew up in a dental family in Minnesota and didn't become a dentist myself, but I ended up starting a consulting company in Colorado. And it happened right at the time when when the state of Colorado was beginning to say, this is in the mid-70s. It happened that lenders here were saying, we will no longer lend you money to do a scratch start. We will lend you money to do to buy a quality practice. And so I didn't know how to put a value on a practice. I didn't know how to do transitions. So we just got in the, excuse me.
I love your ring too. That's pretty cool.
So we just got into the business of learning, along with a couple CPAs and banker and an attorney, and jumped into the trenches and started doing them. And that's a long time ago, and we're still doing them and having a blast doing them. We get to work with people at really important time in their lives. They're having to make huge decisions about what they're going to do with their practice going forward. So we totally specialize in practice transitions, helping people plan them and implement their plan.
Yeah, and you do it extremely well. And today we're going to be talking about a component of that, which is adding the associate. Now, we're going to leave space for this. You actually do an associate feasibility analysis at the end if you're wondering, like, gosh, I need to figure this out. But you have been fielding a lot of calls, as I have, of dentists thinking, so first of all, let's talk about the why. What's the nature of these phone calls that you get?
I had two of them this week, and they were similar. One was a specialty practice, another was a general practice, and they were both asking the same question: how do I know when or if I'm ready to add an associate? And the one party had some unsuccessful adventures with attempting to add associates. and didn't want to do it that way again.
Yeah.
So, and when you're in solo practice and you see so many other practices going to a group model, multiple dentists in the practice, some people get anxious about being in a solo practice because they're hearing so much out there about the solo practice has a dismal future and it's going to be extinct, in the relatively near future. And I know you and I don't agree with that at all.
Not at all. Mm-hmm.
And see constant evidence of how wonderful solo practice can be.
Yeah.
If it's done the right way.
Yeah, if it's done the right way. I totally agree. Now, I want to preface this by saying, as I get older, I tend to put my biases on things, and I know that. So, like, if you're listening to the podcast, I love this profession. I love the freedom of choice. And I like a simple life. I'm one of those people where I don't want 92 employees. That's not my thing, but I also need to respect that other people do like that. And I guess the message would be this. Don't let somebody else decide how you want to practice. You can take everybody's input, advice, everything. But if you're the dentist who really likes a simple, like quiet practice with, a few team members, you like to crush it, have a great life, go for it. If you like a lot of doctors and that's your game and you like growing associates, go for it. But you got to have the right perspective. So we're going to get into this, but I want to just hammer home what you said. We coach a lot of solo practices and they're all crushing it. And I will put the numbers behind it because they have plenty, and I do mean plenty to do in this great world and in this great profession. I think we should ask this question, and there's probably too much information on the internet on this one. Keen Waters publishes these statistics that between 70 and 90% of all partnerships and associateships fail. And I don't have all of the granular aspects of that, but would you say those numbers are pretty high? Is that consistent with what you see?
I would say they're over half.
Over half. Okay, tell us why.
Yeah, and they don't have a plan.
They don't have a plan.
Those transitions have just been, in the most cases, slapped together. I think I need to add an associate. Oh, there's one. Let me have a conversation with you. And pretty soon they're working together, and the owner, the host doctor, did not have a plan. And in order to, one of the hugely important components of putting a successful transition together, by the way, 80% of our associateships work.
Right. And I could guess why. I don't need to guess why. It's done the right way with the details and agreements and boundaries, right?
Right, exactly. So everything flows, though. The component is that everything flows from the owner's plans. So we do a feasibility study, which we'll talk about, but everything begins with the owner having a transition plan and an updated life plan.
Okay, so go a little deeper on that. So if I'm starting down this path where I'm going to ask this question, what are those two things?
Okay, so I had a conversation on Wednesday of this week, and my question back to the potential new client that called us was, how much longer do you intend to practice, and at what pace? Do you want to retire? When you do retire, do you want to retire abruptly? In other words, work really hard at this current pace until you're done and then leave? Do you want to phase out? Is your practice large enough and robust enough that it would allow you to phase out as compared to leaving abruptly? And that's when they start talking about their plans and their life plans. And this person told me, I want to practice another 10 years.
Okay.
I said, well, this is the perfect time to be talking about all this.
Right.
Because you've got enough lead time to accomplish an awful lot in the next 10 years, but you have to get on it.
Right.
And so a practice transition plan excuse me, always includes the associate feasibility analysis, because they need to know, can you support another doctor in your current setting?
Yeah.
Can you do it in the physical plant? Can you do it with an ability to be able to feed and help them build a productive schedule
Right.
first year, not by handing them all of your production, but by helping to grow the practice so that they can become productive.
Yeah.
Because if that doesn't happen, the whole thing is going to blow up.
Yeah. And I know we're going to get down in the details, but in generalities, I mean, just general, neighborhoods, what's typically the amount of time when you do find the right associate where they start paying for themselves? Like it was a good decision. There's some lead time in that, correct?
Absolutely. I would say 9 months.
9 months. Okay.
And there's some flex to that. It could be 6 to 12 months, but it's got to happen in the first year.
Right.
It needs to happen in the first year.
Okay. Talk about why, because I totally agree with that. Why?
Simply because what you're trying to do when you add an associate, if they're going to have the ability to take an equity position later to buy in or buy you out, they've got to be on a path where they're starting to generate enough income and they can begin to see the light that they would be able at some point to be able to afford to buy in. Mm-hmm. Simply stated, that they would be able to make the payments on their portion of the practice overhead, that they would be able to retire their note and make their note payments on school loan debt, and that they would have a good living income remaining after those obligations are met.
Yeah.
And so part of what we do is we talk to them about an approximation of the value of the practice, and to be updated later, and so that they begin to have an understanding of what's going to be required.
Yeah.
And we help them help the practice owner and the incoming doctor set some goals that would have the new doctor producing at a certain level for 4 months in a row, that would create a trigger point and allow them to begin to buy in.
Yeah, I love it. So I've got some other questions too, just to dispel some of the myths, because I get to see the good, bad, and ugly of all of this.
Yeah, I'm sure.
When you're courting or actually talking to an associate, you've got the different paths. Are you talking equity up front? Because there are some dentists that are like, no, I've never talked about that, and I'm like, you've never even mentioned that? They've never mentioned that? So it becomes an unspoken elephant in the room. And then let me make this more complicated, because I like to do that, and then you always make it more simple. I've had dentists that take on an associate, and they're like, wow, this person's a real go-getter. And I'm like, that's awesome. Yeah, they're asking me for equity already. And I'm like, well, that's what a go-getter does. And then I've had the other side of it where they're like, yeah, I have this associate who doesn't really want to work a whole lot and just wants a job. And so how's that going? They go, yeah, well, they're not really driven, And so you kind of get what you get when you're having these conversations. But my point is, how clear are we up front about how this is going to go if I'm the seller?
We are very clear.
How clear? Crystal clear?
Yeah, well, there are some approximations that'll have to be addressed because the numbers will be different later.
Right.
In terms of impacting the valuation. But we let them know that we're not looking for an associate. We're looking for a young doctor who wants to be an owner, but will be an employee in the initial phase of the relationship.
Right.
So we set it up that way so that they're thinking about themselves becoming an owner in the practice. And we don't want people to come in and try it.
Right.
They're going to have a period there while they're an employee where they will have the chance to stay or leave. But we talk to them and we help create a clear pathway to ownership.
Okay, so let's let's go there and I always like to have fun in this podcast, so don't get mad. Okay, so I love what you said. We're not going to try it. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to try this marriage thing. I'm going to try it. No, when you get married, you got to be like all in. So I will eventually get to the values piece, because your values have to line up with this person, because if they don't line up, you're screwed from the get-go, no matter how good they are or flashy or whatever. The second piece of it is now, you're talking about giving the expensive money. Like, one thing is to pay a salary. When you start giving the E money, which is the equity, that's the big time investment. So you want to make sure that when we're going down this path, we've had plenty of runway, we have a plan, and now we're going to go into the E money, which is the really expensive money. And it's a good investment for you if all the boxes have been checked, correct?
That's right. So their ability to buy in is going to be dependent. It's going to be conditional on a highly successful initial employment phase. Okay? It's not automatic. Okay, the 2 years is up. I get to buy in now?
Right.
That's not the way it should be set up.
Okay.
It should be, and a highly successful initial employment phase really needs to be defined.
All right, let's define one.
Okay.
We'll just make one up here. So typically with those initial employment phases, what are you thinking? That the 9 months or the year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you're going to have to produce this much in this time. And then if expectations aren't met, then we have a sit down of some kind.
Absolutely. Or maybe long before that. And they have to be able to get along with the team. The team has to like them.
Right. Genuinely.
And endorse them. You want the doctor's endorsement, but the team endorsement's more powerful.
100%.
And so the patients have to really like them.
Right.
They're going to be fed some active patients and some new patients from the practice when they first come on board, but they better start generating their own referrals.
Yeah.
Along with that, by creating wonderful experiences that the patients like and go home and tell their friends and family about.
Yeah.
So they have to be successful at a variety of levels. They have to be coachable.
Explain coachable. Because everybody's going to say, I'm coachable.
Right. We see a lot of young doctors who are not coachable.
Okay.
At least not at first, because they haven't gone bump in the night yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so coachable to me is really simply having them be hungry to learn.
Right.
And open and coming with a mindset that, I learned a lot in dental school, but I have so much more to learn. And I want to be in a position and in a practice culture where that's available and embraced. So you want the candidate who's borderline going to drive you half nuts with all their questions, instead of the one who sits back and never asks a question.
Yeah.
That person worries me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you're saying, because this stuff is so important. So one of the core values we have here is always be growing. That's a non-negotiable. Somebody's got to be into the growing piece. The second thing is, I'll say this on the benefit of the associate, because all of you are going to be searching for this opportunity, and the word mentorship comes up. They go, oh, I'm willing to mentor. You have to ask, what does that look like? Is that in the hallway on your way to Florida? Or is that like a sit down regular process? Or are we just going to try to catch each other when we're super busy? A real mentor is invested monthly, weekly. Like, I'm going to sit down, we're going to review cases. We do them on Thursday mornings or Thursday afternoon. Don't you agree?
Absolutely agree. So the owner's decision to add an associate comes along with a commitment to being willing to make their life more challenging in the early going with all the mentoring you're going to have to do.
Right.
So you get the dividends and the rewards later. But you have to be willing to make that commitment. And that means, it could mean Saturday morning meetings, but it means meetings in the schedule.
Right.
and with topics in the schedule.
Yeah.
Uh,
I love it. I love it. Now, I do have so many questions. And again, you guys can do the associate feasibility, analysis with Paul. But let's start at I just have this question from the beginning.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm practicing. I'm a single doc. What are some key performance indicators that do you have any off the top of your head, like numbers of patients? Because I'm just going to say this is the reason why I asked the question. I see people building a facility and they only have 1,400 or 1,300 patients. I'm like, so you're adding 4 more ops? Yes. Why? Well, for the associate. I'm like, the associate. So can I meet this? No, I don't have the associate. I'm like, you don't have the associate yet, but it's all in the field of dreams. Like if you build it, they will come,
Sure.
So do you have any performance indicators, some key benchmarks that let's just decide if you're a candidate from the get-go?
You build the 4 ops only if you've identified a practice in the neighborhood that is available for you to purchase and merge into your suite. So you grow 17 years worth over the weekend.
Right.
But to have that grow slowly, let's use some numbers. If you have 1,300 to 1,500 active patients, and unless you're not going to, if you're going to cut back on your own schedule and time commitment, you could potentially add someone with that number of patients, but that's not big enough.
Right.
In a general practice. Same thing in a specialty practice. If you have a nice referral base that beautifully feeds your solo practice, you're not ready for an associate yet. So you really would have to add someone who's got some sparkle and substance, so that they can help grow the practice and expand the referral base.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I just have we can make this a 3-hour show. Let's say I'm a dentist and I don't want to put my whole foot in. I'm just going to put my toe in the water, where I want to find an associate for 2 days a week, or because you see these configurations where an associate is working somewhere else and you're going to go down that path. Any complications you'd call out right at the beginning or expectations we'd want to lay out?
Oh, absolutely. And we see people doing that, especially through COVID and immediate post-COVID. There were lots of young dentists who had kind of cobbled a weekly work schedule together, right? And so they're working 2 days here, 1 day there, and so on. So people were available for that type of thing. But now it's very challenging to find somebody who can free up 2 days and give you the kind of focus, and that person the kind of focus that's going to be required to begin building an important role in that practice, even on a 2-day basis.
Let's talk about that too, because again, even if you're a solo practice, you know how this works. I've had solo docs go, I'm building my own practice and I got this location and I'm there 2 days a week. I'm like, well, you got to get over there as fast as possible. You can't build a growing practice. You got to be there. You got to have conversations. Same rule applies for an associate, correct?
It does. Absolutely does. It takes your focus.
Right.
And that means time and time commitment to be there and be visible. You can do creative things with schedules, but I'm getting off into another topic here, but there are so many people also who have a really nice, sweet solo practice and who have colleagues who have 4 practice sites or 6. And they say, I think I need another one. So they set up a satellite, and exactly what you just identified is what happens next. Mm-hmm. Because if they're going to add an associate and then try to do that expansion, the associate's not ready to help with that. They don't really understand their role yet, and they don't really understand the practice culture. And you can only spread the owner so far.
Right.
And it lots of failures in terms of multiple practice models.
Yeah.
And a number of good successes, of course, as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's continue down that path. I mean, you're the engineer behind a lot of successful adoptions of an associate. What are some other elements that you see that make this work when they do it well?
When they do it well, the owner has their own transition plan and life plan in place, and they've got their action steps and timetables. So they've got it late in the 10-year case that I mentioned. They're going to have a 10-year plan and action steps and timetables that need to take place during that 10 years to prepare them for their eventual exit. It may mean the addition of another doctor. It could be over 10 years the addition of 2 doctors.
Right.
But that's highly dependent on the success pattern of the first placement of the first doctor.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing. They need to have a facility that's large enough to house the second doctor, because you do not want to have a small facility, bring in the second doctor, and then split shift.
Right.
Because they're never there when you're there.
Right.
And they'll never really understand how the success was created.
Yeah.
Because they're in the off hours with the new team,
Right. Now, and again, please, if you're listening, just listen to the bias here, because this is the cool thing about it's my show. So I've seen very few people that do that well. So they'll go, I work from 7 to 2, and then I have another doctor who's an associate comes in and works from 2 to 7 or 2 to 8. So that way we capitalize on the utilization of our facility. Well, what happens ultimately is your production might grow a little bit, but you've got constant problems, of the schedule. Had another team member quit yesterday, and man, they're just not happy working a different schedule. And then there's a whole bunch of resistance from the night shift because they don't like the morning shift. The morning shift, those people all get to pick up their kids. I come in here at 2 and I leave at 8 p.m. So you got a little talk about front and back not liking each other. Morning and night don't like each other either.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's impossible, but what that requires is an intense level of organization that goes beyond what most people would consider.
That's exactly right. If you're wondering what to do inside a transition plan, always go back to putting the patient at the center of the model.
Right.
How will this impact our patients? So if you have a split shift, your patients are going to have a very different experience if they come in on one shift or the other shift. It's not going to be consistent. It's not going to be comparable.
Right.
And you're not going to grow the practice that way. So that's why you would have to either move and build out another suite, or if you're fortunate enough to have adjacent space to appropriately, not go overboard, but appropriately expand your suite, and the lead time to do that, then you can do that. Yeah. I'm a real big fan of growth by acquisition as well.
Yeah, I am too. I've had so many solo docs and multiple docs grow instantly. When you say grow over the weekend, I have one doctor, I mean, that's how he's grown his practice. I think he's purchased 4 practices. Yeah. And he's like, every time I do it, it's like a no-brainer, and he feeds it into his existing system really well. So I absolutely love that. So, the other thing that we need to call out is when you're bringing in somebody else, is to really identify the type of work, the quality of work, because this does happen too. Like, I'm going to keep all the good patients. You get all the lousy work and the lousy hours and the less desirable stuff. Now, as you as the owner, you might be saying, well, that's your passage here. You got to do that because I had to do that. So can you speak to that? Because I hear that conversation all the time.
Yes. In a general practice, we're talking about the first year that the employee doctor is in the practice. The practice has to be strong enough to move 300 to 500 active patients or new patients in combination, but that total into the young doctor's schedule in a thoughtful way. And if you can't do that, then that's one indicator that you look at. If you can't do that without harming the host doctor's productivity and personal income, then you're not quite ready.
Right.
And there are lots of other things to look at as well.
Yeah. And so that would be one of the criteria that wasn't met in the initial adoption phase if we're not able to do that. And so the whole idea is that in this plan, it's a step-by-step. Numbers need to be met. And then we get to have the next sit down, which is the equity play conversation. And that triggers the next series of events, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. But even before we get to that, Kirk, the owner in the solo practice, bringing on the young doctor, has to have a financial reserve fund sitting there to be able to absorb the additional expenses for much of that first year that the new doctor's in, or they'll end up bringing somebody in if they're tight financially. They'll end up bringing somebody on board, and after 3-4 months, regardless of the performance of the young doctor, they just look at themselves in the mirror one morning and say, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
Right.
You know, I painted myself into a corner. So that's a component as well that I wanted to mention.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the why. Do you have a target for that? Because, you know, again, you're going to be subsidizing your salary for this new team member. Right. The other thing is you're probably going to add some costs. And if you're a solo doc, you already know this. Your accountant gives you a P&L and goes, "You're doing really good every year." And you go, "Oh, thanks, man. But where's the money?" And they go, "Well, that's a whole nother story because you got to pay taxes on all this, and all those loans that you have, those don't show up on this P&L, you know, because so those are things that you just you got to have your brain around the impact of a bigger financial amount. Now, again, it's done really well. But the thing I would say is, I'll just piggyback on what you said, is that I see the same thing. The things that are done really well, it's a plan. They've got a third party, whether it be a coach or an accountant. I use the 7-doctor practice. I know really well. They have a Tuesday meeting, and it's with the accountant, and the accountant puts them all in their place. There's another practice that's about an hour and a half south of here, and they have a 10-doctor practice, and they do the exact same thing. On a Wednesday, the accountant puts them all in their place, and it's numbers, baby. It's all like leave your emotions at the door. We're going to get on the same page so that things are clearly communicated. Correct?
Absolutely true. One of the things that you need to in the plan to add somebody to the practice, you need to calculate the ripple effect of and the impact of what that's going to do to the practice. For example, are you staffed strongly enough that you can absorb another doctor without adding additional team members? Typically, they have to add an assistant at a minimum. And then there's a ripple effect. As the practice continues to grow, you're going to add more people.
Right.
And that will fan the flames of the growth. But there is definitely a ripple effect. What kind of investment am I going to have to make in terms of updating some technology in the office to get ready to have that other doctor come on board?
Yeah.
What are we going to have to be able and willing to spend on continuing education? Mm-hmm. What are our new staffing costs going to look like?
Yeah.
And there's a big checklist there.
Big checklist. And again, listen to this. I mean, somebody might be listening to this going, "I'm not getting an associate. You guys scared the hell out of me." No, we're just trying to prepare you, before you go down this path. And so the savings amount, prior to the pandemic, we always used to say, have at least 3 solid months of cash personally and a good year of cash for the business. And now, the pandemic changed a lot of things. Having cash on hand gives you the leverage for a lot of things. Another thing I would add, Paul, on this, and I've learned this the hard way, is that growth sucks cash. When you grow, you need cash. I thought, when you reach this mile mark, man, it's going to be easy. Yes, there are some things that happen that are easier. And then you realize, wow, this animal eats a lot. And so we got to have more cash to be able to do what we want to do because the bank doesn't say yes as much. And you've already learned, like, I like cash, having cash in it. And then lastly, you pointed to something that I think is just important just to add to the checklist is that once you go down this path, it's really hard to pivot back. So for instance, you have 4 ops, you're doing 1.5 million, you're keeping close to half of it. You're loving it. It's great. Then you're like, we're growing like crazy. I'm going to add 4 more ops. So now we're at 8, and then maybe you get that associate, it's working well. And you're like, I'm going to add another one. So let's go to 12 operatories. And then you got to be ready to play the game at a whole nother level, which means your stomach lining's got to be a whole lot tougher because there's a good chance, no matter how much you work with Paul, it's still a little bit of an organ transplant. And let me explain. Paul gets all the conditions right. We find the kidney that's going to fit in the body. But sometimes the body doesn't take the kidney. Now, that's not a great analogy, but sometimes you get where I'm going with this is like, now you've built the 3 doctor practice, and forever it's going to be a 3 doctor practice until you hand over the keys. So you just got to be prepared for that whole thing. And you could find the greatest situation ever, but it's like a transplant. No doctor will say, yeah, this works every time. I'm 100% successful. There's always room for error, and you got to be okay with that room. And that's why the cash and the plan work.
I like it. I agree with it.
Now, there's not even a question there, but like, I want to know, like, from your perspective, I mean, you guys that are listening, I get to spend a lot of time with Paul. So we've already gone down these paths and he's helped me so many times with doctors that I care about. But are there any other thoughts or cautionary tales? And again, not trying to scare you, just trying to prepare you as you look at this road ahead. When I ask the question, should I add an associate?
You have to have a plan, and you will be able to, in doing that, we help people do an assessment of their readiness to be able to add somebody effectively. But then you have to have that plan in place. You could find a great person that fits your practice culture beautifully, and if you don't have your plan in place, it may not work.
Right.
Let me just say this also. A successful transition is absolutely achievable.
Yes.
It's available to you. And you just have to be careful and cautious and make good selections and have a good plan together that is connected to your life plan. And you've got to be in a position where you personally are ready, financially and psychologically. You're ready to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very well said, Paul. Like, you guys, you can do this. You're going to want to do it from a position of strength where you've got the cash, you've got the plan. I'm going to highly suggest that you sit down with Paul and do the analysis with him because he'll call it out. And Paul's a straight shooter. And you create this plan. Now, let me say one more thing about the word plan, because you just hit a trigger for me, Paul. Okay. Dentists don't like plans. They talk treatment plans, but most dentists I've met plan their vacations more than they plan their lives. In their businesses. You ask them about a vacation, they're going to tell you, I'm going to Barcelona. We're going to be there for 2 days. We're going to stay in a hotel where I already got the hotels. I'm going to say, and then we fly in the morning flight the next day. We're going to go over here. And I'm like, wow, that's quite the plan. Oh, it's amazing. And then we're going to write. They tell you every detail of the plan. So what's your plan for your life? Not sure. So like having a plan for your life is a good one. And my hope for your plan in your life is that when you do go down the path as an associate, like, you don't need the money to sell the practice. It's just going to be the gravy on top of it. So if anything goes bad, and that's a whole nother podcast that Paul and I did, but I love this profession so much. I love the people in it, and you're walking into the greatest profession ever if you're a young dentist.
Yeah.
But if you heard anything, I hope you heard this. You got to have a plan. You got to have somebody auditing the plan. The plan's got to hit its KPIs. It's got to hit its triggers. Don't wing it. Winging it is not a good idea. So, Paul, how do people get in touch with you to do the associate feasibility analysis?
Go on our website, the Sletten Group Inc. and take a look at what we do and who we are and what our philosophies are in terms of working with the dental profession. And I would be happy to have a conversation with you at no fee, of course, to just learn about what you're thinking about and what you're pondering for your future. You know, I talked about having a plan an awful lot today. You have to have a flexible plan. You don't have to have a rigid plan. And that builds some comfort into it. Because when we think about putting a rigid plan together, it really locks us in.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're in a straitjacket sometime.
Right.
Sometimes. When I was a kid, that's how I learned how to set goals. They were really rigid.
Yeah.
And that was the paradigm of the day. And so the very act of planning includes flexibility.
Yeah, and just point out some things that are important when it comes to that flexibility. Go a little deeper on that. So if I'm putting a plan together, what might be included in that flexibility?
So if we're going to put a 10-year plan together with our client, it's not going to be my plan, it's going to be their plan, first of all. Secondly, there are going to be some approximations in that 10-year plan. By the second or third year, we want to be in this position. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, that's not the way we plan. You begin, as you know so well, you go out 10 years and you say, where do I want to be on my last day here? What do I want the practice to look like? What am I leaving behind in terms of the possibility of great success for my successors? And my great team that I've worked with this entire time, and those kinds of things. And then you say, okay, if I'm going to be that far in 10 years, how far would I have to be in 9 years? Or in 8 years? Or 7, 6, 5, 4? And that's how we plan.
Yep.
We can't try to begin a plan looking at what to do next week without some kind of concept of why it's important.
Yeah, love it.
And that makes planning fun.
It does. It does. So, Paul, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for being on here, brother. You're always adding insight and help to everybody in the accidental community. So appreciate you, my friend.
Appreciate you as well. Great to be with you.
So great to be with you. So I know you're going to go out and enjoy the great weather today and get some golf in. But if you guys are listening, make sure you check out Paul's website, do the associate feasibility analysis. If you weren't taking notes, don't worry. We're taking notes for you. You can flip up to the show notes in any podcast listening vehicle that you're using, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes. All the notes will be there. You can just click right on it. It'll take you directly there, and make sure you check it out. Keep sending us suggestions for things that you guys want to see. I want this to be your podcast. I mean, I'm the host of it. I like doing it, but I want to talk about things that you want to talk about. So I get them all the time from you guys. We're lining them up on anything in relationship to your practice. And I'm going to have Paul back over and over and over again. So until we see you guys next time, or you hear from us next time, keep watching or keep listening to the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy your day.